I'm Bryce Prescott, host of Rules of Success and creator of the 12-week expansion program, and I am an outlier.
Welcome to Outlier on Air with Ever Gonzalez, the show where we interview the founders, disruptors, and mavens of the world. Learn how grit, failure, and success are all a part of the entrepreneurial journey.
Hey everybody, welcome to Outlier on Air, the podcast where we interview founders, disruptors, and mavens. As always, I'm your host, Ever Gonzalez. On today's episode, we have Bryce Prescott of Rules of Success and Urbia Exchange. Bryce, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Ever. It's good to be a part of the two-time club.
That's right. We don't have very many, and you are one of them for sure, for a few different reasons. Because you bring the heat, you have a lot of good things going on. And second of all, because you're a personal friend, you're in my mastermind group. We've invited you down to Southern Utah to speak at one of our events. And I wouldn't have you back if I didn't think that you can add more value than you did in the first episode. So welcome back, and thanks for being here.
You are welcome, my friend. I'm honored. You've done such a great job with your show, and your list of guests is just a who's who. So to be a part of that, it's an honor. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks. So now let's, for this episode, right, for those that maybe didn't listen to the first episode or aren't as familiar with you, I want to get to know you, what you've done in the past, what you're working on now, and then just kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly of your own personal entrepreneurial journey. But before we get into that, where are you calling us from right now?
I am in Salt Lake City, Utah.
What's it like working out of Salt Lake, doing what you're doing? What's the vibe there?
That's a great question. It's kind of difficult to pin down, honestly. The efforts that I've been engaged in for the past years really have been as a combination with Rules of Success, my own podcast, and that spun off into some coaching and consulting that I've been able to do and create for myself and my clients. And then, as you had referenced, Urbia Exchange, which is a real estate platform that we can discuss a little bit later. It's been a lot of virtual work to where, the clients I've been working with have been outside of Salt Lake. But in general, Salt Lake is a great place. It has a very cool entrepreneur vibe. It's close to Utah County, which is basically, Silicon Valley of the Rockies. There's so much action going on there in tech and some of the companies that are producing just great stuff out of there. To be close to that is exciting. Just generally, the entrepreneur community here in Salt Lake is top notch, and there's a lot of really great people here.
Yeah, good answer. The reason I ask is you're right. Northern Utah is making a lot of noise when it comes to startups and entrepreneurship, but I wanted to see how that related to you because a lot of your stuff is online, and I guess it's just cool being up there with other bright minds doing some pretty cool things.
Yeah, you're scratching a scab, so to speak. I really should be better about that here, and because I've only recently started to make outreach to some of the other entrepreneurs and coaches and people in the space, and it's been 2-3 months that I've been actively doing that. And the people that I've been meeting up with, other whether it be in real estate or whether it be in coaching or even in podcasting, really, really great people with vision of what these kind of emerging markets are, like podcasting and coaching and some of the more technological spaces within real estate. As an example, I was able to meet up last week with this guy who's really connected to a very prominent real estate education company. We were talking about Urbia Exchange a little bit for what it could do to them. And his mindset, the way that he was describing things, I felt like it was a kindred spirit. And I know that that's not specific to Utah, but it is nice to be able to find those type of people up here and connect with them. Being a part of your mastermind too has been a blessing too, because some of the other people that I've been able to network with are people I've met in the mastermind. James Garrett of Brain by Design is one that I've spent a fair amount of time with here, and I just love it.
Yeah, great. I'm kind of in the same boat there when it comes to a lot of my stuff is online with the interviews that we do and just the mastermind groups and things like that. But there's a magic, right? There's something special about being with other people face to face. Good things happen, and every time I get an opportunity to either host an event, go to an event, those type of things, I'm all for it. I always meet great people, and good things come of it. So I'm glad you're taking a little bit more advantage of where you are. You're in the prime spot, so take advantage of it, and congratulations for making that choice to get out there a little bit more.
Well, thanks. You're right. There's I had this moment not too long ago where I was looking at the landscape of where I was putting my attention when it comes to my coaching business specifically. And when I say that for the sake of this conversation, I'm talking about Rules of Success as a podcast and some of the value adds that come to the listeners of that show. And that includes some free content, includes some coaching and some other things that are there. And I was recognizing that of the list of clients that I've had that have been the funnest to work with and also that have had the best results, they've been ones where I've actually been able to, at some point, meet with them face to face. The entire experience doesn't have to have been face to face, but isolating that time where it's just, the two of us in a room, talking real, discussing life, discussing goals, discussing expansion, that really is a powerful dynamic that I think, unfortunately, gets lost somewhat in this space of easy technology and communication. When you can get in a room with somebody, whether it be a potential client or friend or whoever, it's a different experience and different outcomes come of that. And I think that we could all do more of that. We lose a little bit of that connection with technology, with just how easy it is. I mean, it's a blessing and a curse at the same time, but I'm following your admonition in that to do that more because it matters.
For sure. I mean, even with the two of us, I get to talk to you every week on our mastermind call. But being up in northern Utah earlier, or I guess what was it, last month, and getting to spend a couple of days with you was great. You can't beat that. But good, I'm glad. So let's, for our listeners, I want to paint the picture first of who you are and what you're doing before we kind of get deeper into Rules of Success and Urbia Exchange. So how do you introduce yourself at a party or at a conference? I'm meeting you for the first time. What do you say?
That's a great question.
Because you got a lot of things going on, right? It's one of those things that sometimes I struggle with that as well. So for you, walk us down. Let us know.
Well, the way that I break it down now, quite simply, is just that I'm just an entrepreneur. And then as we talk, if I am introducing myself to somebody at a party, it's like, I got a couple of different projects I've got going on. Usually the first thing I talked about is being a host of my own podcast, Rules of Success, because it's one of the easiest things to talk about where I'm not required to talk about myself, but yet I can connect with other people with life lessons and different, anecdotes specific to entrepreneurship, to expansion, to, being a better dad, being a better husband, having a better body, like all the different things that are important to me and as a host of Rules of Success and the way that I live my life. Using that as a way to introduce myself, I guess, it leaves a lot of different colors to paint with when it comes to the conversation. I've started this practice. Actually, it's funny you bring this up because I started this practice where I try not to talk about what I do when I'm introducing myself to people or being introduced to people, but ask them more questions and inspire a conversation. It's like asking them, so what excites you to get you out of the bed in the morning? What is something you feel you're passionate about? And it's an interesting tell, especially in certain corporate circles where I'll run within real estate, where some people don't know how to answer that. It's all about who they are, what their accolades are, how much money they made, and
and it's funny how many of us are tied to what we do, and we kind of define ourselves by either how much we make or our title and things like that. So that's actually a pretty cool approach. Get them thinking.
Yeah, well, and it's somewhat self-serving at the same time. I found that I've been on this journey of self-development for most of my adult life, and I noticed in the last several years as I've had some really challenging things come to me and had to work through them and adopt new mindsets, adopt new beliefs, create new skill sets, that and this is going to sound like I'm a jerk, but I have very little patience for individuals that aren't self-aware. Like I can sniff them out immediately. Like if you're just going to talk about yourself and your accolades and it's a boring conversation, I don't do well with that anymore. I have to have something deeper to connect with. And asking questions like the ones I referenced make it easy to it's a tell. It's like you're showing your hand at that point.
Nothing wrong with that. You're a jerk for a lot of other reasons, not for that. I'm just kidding.
You are known for telling the truth, so I appreciate the clarity there.
Nice. So again, Rules of Success, a podcast. How long have you been doing it now? I mean, you're doing good in the world, not just by having people on your show, but I mean, you're giving some pretty good advice and direction, and it's not just advice that you've read on in a book or things that you've seen on different shows. I mean, this is hard earned experiences that you've personally had that I want to get into here in just a sec. But give us a little bit more detail about Rules of Success, the podcast, how long you've been doing it, what it's about, and what do you expect to happen in the next couple of years with it?
Sure. Well, the birth of Rules of Success is kind of an interesting story. If you're okay with it, I'll share a bit of it with you here.
Yes.
In my former life, I'll say I've had a couple different careers, if you will. I started in the early 2000s after I got out of the ski industry of all things, and I was in mortgages for a bit. And then in 2008, I started an equity firm with a friend of mine where we did a whole lot of real estate over the course of 4 years. And that company kind of crashed, and it was the most financial success I'd ever had in my entire life up to that point. And at the same time, it was new, and there was mistakes that were made, and things happened, and it kind of crashed and burned in a very spectacular way come 2012. And what ended up happening was after that, I found myself really, I had a bout with cancer for a little bit. I had some health issues. My marriage was on the rocks. It was just a really rough time. And in the middle of all that, I was actually, when I got out of that real estate company, I was sitting on a little bit of a nest egg and trying to, live out, turn what I had into something else as far as a business. And so I tried agricultural commodities of all things. I had relationships in South America. I met a guy that had relationships in Southeast Asia, and we were trying to broker these deals together. And I'd spent a lot of time traveling the world trying to put these things together. And in August of 2014, I was sitting in a bar in Sao Paulo, Brazil. I was there for a deal we were trying to put together. And that day, the deal had fell apart. And it was one of many deals that had fallen apart, but I'd put a lot of emotional weight into this deal because I was basically broke. I'd spent all my money, no more assets left to sell, just really in a bad spot. And I kept just thinking that if this deal closes, then, things will be better. And it didn't. We got hoodwinked and some things happened, and it was just kind of a really rough day. And I was sitting in this bar. I had about a half a bottle of red wine in my belly. I was eating a steak, very emotional, just not feeling it. And I kept having these thoughts about what I really wanted to do. I think it was the first real kind of conversation I'd had with myself in many years up to that point. And on the flight down to Brazil, it was the first time I'd ever gotten into listening to podcasts. I'd listened to a couple of them, Joe Rogan. One of my favorite actors is Jerry Ferrara from the show Entourage. And he has a podcast that was really lo-fi, meaning it wasn't overproduced. It was just him and some of his actor buddies. And I started to see this connection that no matter what I was doing in my career, I was always finding myself in a position to help people and to share my experiences in a way that helped them to traverse their experiences in an easier way. And I thought, what? I got nothing to lose. Let's do this. So I got home, started looking into it, talked to a friend of mine. Rules of Success, before when we actually launched on Black Friday of that year, the day after Thanksgiving. And it was had a different format than it has now. There was a co-host and it even had a different name. And we lasted for about 13 episodes under that format. And then it transitioned to where I was a solo host, and it kind of evolved into what it is. But the point of creating Rules of Success was I was seeing these things that were happening in my own life that I knew I was not alone. And those things were, I was in my late 30s at the time. I was chasing the dollar. Everything that I was doing was saying that money was the answer. That if only I had more money, then everything would fix itself. But underneath it all, I knew that that was actually a lie. That if I had all the money in the world, it wouldn't change the fact that I didn't have any discipline when it came to how I cared for my body. I knew that if I had all the money in the world, it didn't change the fact that my marital relationship had issues that needed to be addressed that money weren't going to fix. And I knew that if I had all the money in the world, that it wasn't going to fix my disconnection to myself spiritually and how I looked at life. And I thought, I'm not alone in this. And that fight of wanting a balanced life and realizing that it was just a scientific approach to each one of those areas at the same time in varying intensities, that you actually can create a life that you want. And I started living out the things I was talking about. And some wonderful things happened over the course of at the time that we're recording this ever, I've produced 160 episodes of Rules of Success. I got in the best shape of my life. My marriage became passionate again. Things changed with the way I was looking at myself, being able to creatively express myself differently, feeling in touch spiritually in a way that I hadn't done. And then on top of that, I started seeing avenues to make money that were actually purpose-driven. And one of them was kind of what happened because of Rules of Success. I had people approaching me wanting my assistance in the capacity of a coach. And I wasn't doing Rules of Success to be a coach. I was doing it because I had something to say. And it just kind of created this little cottage industry, if you will, that made it so that I could help people figure out, men more specifically, but not exclusively, how to figure out how to live a better life.
So you've been very successful when it comes to money, right? You've done well in the past. This change that you're talking about, this kind of transformation of your thoughts and yourself, did that happen when you were at the top of your game, or was this, or like you discussed, something, different deals didn't come through, and you were more on the downside when it came to the being a top earner? When did that change happen, and why do you think it happened the way it did when it did?
Well, again, another great question, Ever. It was tiered, and what I mean by that is, so, as I had shared in the early 2000s up until 2008, I was a mortgage broker for that time. During a time when being a mortgage broker was a very lucrative living, you could make well into 5 figures every month quite easily, and if you were ambitious and could run a team, you could do even better than that. And as the crash was pending and some things happened, I was introduced to a book that really started to change the way that I thought. And that book was called Secrets of the Millionaire Mind by T. Harv Eker. And it was the first book I'd ever read that had any sort of language in there about, law of attraction type of thinking, that what you play across the stage of your mind has an effect in the results that you experience in your reality, And I ended up going to an event, a seminar that was put on by the company that he ran at the time called Peak Potentials. It was, called the Millionaire Mind Intensive. And it was a couple days of just really kind of emotional and psychological rewiring to some, limiting beliefs that I'd had. And I got out of that event. I went to another one just a couple short weeks later, to where I was sitting in front of a presenter that was giving an opportunity that was a real estate-based opportunity that was exactly like one I had just been presented several months before to the guy that ended up being my partner. And I was fresh in this, if you think it, you can do it type of mentality. And so I came home and we started a business, and that business had a great run. It was very, very financially successful. And I was really fresh in this whole law of attraction stuff, this idea that if I map it out in my mind, that I make these goals based off of things that I think are already in motion to happen. If I choose to make $1 million and I make it so that's emotionally a reality for me, and I have my thoughts support that, then it'll happen. And I had watched that happen many, many times. Well, several years into that, though, I got lazy with that sort of law of attraction thinking, and I got arrogant, to where I thought it wasn't the work I was doing, in my thoughts and in my life that was making it happen. It was me. And, I was this wizard that could, yield whatever I wanted to. And I remember, specific instances where I made really foolish decisions in my business, and then legitimately thought in my mind that I could disconnect myself from the actual consequence of that decision because of this type of thinking. And naturally, that's just a recipe for disaster. And disaster kind of came to me, and we had this falling off. And I realized, it took several years to kind of settle this in, but I realized that, my destruction of what happened in that business wasn't a sign that the law of attraction wasn't real. It was a sign that it was, and that I neglected what I was doing, and I didn't allow, the things to continue that had got me there in the first place. In 2011, November 9th, actually, 2011, found a tumor in my body that had to be removed with an emergency procedure. Was shortly after that diagnosed with inflamed cancer of the lymph nodes, and I'd had some issues with one of my testicles. And at that time, I'm looking down this barrel of life with a clock on it that seemed to be expiring a lot sooner than I thought it would be. And I'm recounting all of these different kind of lessons along the way of, life and what you think about, you bring about, and how this works. And when I was able to come to grips with what was happening within my body and how my body was betraying me, I realized that the reason why my body was betraying me is because I was betraying my body. I was not doing the things to care for it. I was, thinking horrible things at the time. I was drinking too much. I was just destructive in a lot of my thoughts. And all of these things kind of came full circle and really forced me to look at things different and to restart my belief that what I think about, I bring about. And I chose an alternative route for my cancer treatment that I got some flack from, but it ended up proving to be the right move for me, where I was able to just take my health into my own hands and, really address what I eat, what I drink, my exercise, the way my body responds, my hormone levels, the different things that, as a 41-year-old man at this, moment of my life, I had never looked at before. I'd overlooked. And so to answer your question, these realizations came kind of like the tide. It was like there was these ebbs and flows where I would have this really strong realization and this really powerful new knowledge that would come to me. And then it would kind of pull back a little bit and I'd forget. And then other things would happen and it would push the tide of that knowledge and that experience forward even further. And, here in 2017, I'm still involved somewhat in that ebb and flow. But I've gotten to the point now where I'm unwilling to involve myself in certain things unless they will allow me the freedom of expression, the freedom of choice, and the ability to actually have my purpose as Bryce Prescott's purpose to be made known through the execution of whatever it is I'm doing. I've missed out on a lot of money that I could have made in exchange for that, but that time and that freedom is a lot more powerful and more important to me than that.
That's where the rub is, I think, right? You are where you are right now from the success that you've had to almost kind of really hitting rock bottom, health-wise, financially, you took a hit, those things, and now you're kind of building yourself up, and you're doing a great job with Urbia Exchange that we'll talk about here in just a sec, but with Rules of Success and the coaching and all the different things that you're doing. For those that are listening, though, without us having to go and hit rock bottom, right now, what kind of advice would you have for us? Certain things that we can do, a certain mindset that we can kind of have ourselves. What would you tell us right now, where we can kind of learn from your experience of hitting rock bottom?
Well, here's something that I've learned along the way that hopefully will help the listeners of this show. One of the things that has become an absolute truth for me is that change is pretty much impossible without some sort of trauma attached to it. There's got to be this moment where the pain of change shifts to where it's actually less than the pain of staying the same. And if you're not, though, in one of those traumatic experiences, like a divorce or health or bankruptcy or those really kind of life-altering experiences, it still is possible to tap into trauma that you've experienced to complete that equation so that you can shift your mindset towards change. Every single one of us, if we spend enough time in our thoughts, we've had moments of our lives where it hurt, where our decisions bit us in the backside, or where things didn't go the way we wanted them to. We've had relationships that have failed, even if we've never been through a divorce. Nobody's immune to having had challenges, trauma. And by revisiting in a weird way, by revisiting that trauma and realizing I don't want to have to ever experience something like that or worse again, you can manufacture that motivation to make the difference. Now, the missing part, though, that a lot of people miss is it's not about just the energy there. In my coaching and on my podcast, I've talked about this very simple formula that if you apply towards every area of your life, you will be able to measure and see why you're doing well or why you're not. And it's basically just three simple pillars. You have to have three things to be able to succeed in anything you do. And those three things are quite simply, the first one is you've got to have access to the right information. The second one is you got to have access to the right guidance. And the third one is you got to have access to the right community. Now, when you look at the idea of change, okay, so let's look at something simple as your health, right? If you don't have the right information, you're never going to be able to change. If your information says that drinking milkshakes and cheesecake all day long is your diet, it's going to help you get skinny, that's bad intel.
Wait,
that's
what?
Not information that's going to work.
I got to change my diet now. Thanks.
I didn't want to burst your bubble on air, but hopefully, we can talk about that after the show if you need to.
Nice.
But and then from there, you've got to have the right guidance, the people to assist you in the things you don't know about. Again, with fitness, having some sort of trainer or person or way program that's going to help you to know what to do and what not to do. And then, of course, a community, you've got to be around people of like mind that are looking out for you just like you're looking out for them. And so for those that, you don't have to get cancer or be bankrupt or have divorce to be able to make changes. You just got to have those three things, and you've got to find an emotional anchor to a painful part of your past that you are looking to avoid so that you can kind of have a reminder, an emotional reminder of, oh yeah, that sucked. I don't want to deal with that again.
I like the 3-pillar approach because anybody can use those, right? Yeah. Anybody can kind of put themselves in that position. I don't care who you are. For the most part, that's going to be very doable, but it requires action, right? You have to be willing to do it. And it sounds like your advice is that my audience right now can definitely do it if they kind of put their mind to it and put their heart and soul into this. And you've obviously done it. You're doing it. You're in the process of I don't know what you tell me. Coming back to where you were before, because I know you, I know some of these answers, but you tell me and our audience, it doesn't sound like you need to get to that same dollar amount that you were making, several years back. It sounds like success to you means a whole lot. It's a whole lot different now. Why don't you tell us that difference?
Well, the difference, first of all, thank you for clarifying that and giving me the opportunity to share that, because again, I think that if I was, if you and I ever we had a chance to one-on-one talk to the listeners of your show, we would realize that a lot of people are like this. A lot of people are like us when it comes to how we define success. They just don't want to admit it because it's, maybe it's not cool or whatever. But I don't need, millions of dollars a year again. I don't need that. What I want and what I'm creating for myself is something that I'm proud of at every step, and that provides the type of income that allows for freedom of choice. So what does that mean as far as a dollar amount? I don't know exactly, but I have an idea. And the interesting thing about it is that idea is based off of a fun, luxurious, toy-filled existence, having all the fun stuff. But there's a different level of attachment that's not there. I don't need the fancy car or the big house to prove to myself or to make up for some insecurity at this point. If I do those things, or if I enjoy that as a part of my life, it's because I just want to, and I'm not attached to it. It doesn't have to be there. I recognize that the thread count of your sheets doesn't make you successful. It's how well you sleep.
Nice. That's a great answer. I love what you're doing. I'm obviously a big fan of who you are, and the process and the journey that you've kind of taken. Let's get into Urbia Exchange a little bit too. So we talked about Rules of Success, your show, and the things that you've done. Now with this, it's slightly different, but let's get into the nuts and bolts of it. Sure.
Well, one of the things I want to make sure that's clear about this, I am by no means a jack of all trades. I'm not doing 10 different things and trying to suck at every one of them. Rules of Success and my coaching have been my bread and butter for a long time. And I had an opportunity it was in when was it? It was the early fall of 2014. Me and the other two co-founders of Urbia Exchange Ben Richardson and Greg Wood. We got together, and I'd known Ben, but I hadn't met Greg at the time. But Greg had known of me from my history with my other real estate company. And he's a current real estate investor. He'd been doing it for many, many years. He was doing it at a level that was a lot smaller than what I had doing it, but his longevity had lasted a lot longer than mine did. And we were talking about how, if only there was a piece of technology in investment real estate that would allow the due diligence process to be a lot quicker, that would allow for a marketplace with access for suppliers of these investment type homes that wasn't MLS hunting down Craigslist type stuff, and that had all the tools necessary to be able to actually, transact business behind the walls of a site. And, part of the business that I had done in my old firm, the reason why we were able to do such massive numbers, we literally did thousands of property transactions over the course of those years, was because of a piece of code that had been